At my 74th birthday dinner, they gave me a notepad and a smile that didn't reach the eyes. "For your thoughts," my daughter said. Her husband chuckled. "Maybe now you'll write down when you've already told that story." The others laughed. I did not. I just held the gift and nodded. It was a pale blue notebook, the kind you buy at a discount store. No ribbon, no card, no sentiment. Just lined pages and a too-thin cover. I turned it over in my hands once, then set it on the table next to my untouched slice of cake. Vanilla. They knew I preferred lemon. Dinner that night was rushed. Takeout, reheated in the oven, chicken parmesan from the place down the street. I could have cooked. Would have if they'd asked. But this was their treat, Jenny had said, as if warmed-up plastic trays were indulgence. They sang the song half-heartedly, voices trailing off before the final note. The kids were on their phones. Tom kept checking his watch. Jenny brought out the cake with a sparkler, not candles. "Less mess," she'd said. I watched them all eat and laugh and scroll, and I realized no one had asked me how I felt. No one had said, "Happy birthday, Mum." Not really. They said the words, but not the weight, like they were fulfilling a chore. After dinner, I gathered plates without being asked. It was habit, not resentment. My knees ached. My hands stung. I scraped uneaten food into the bin and loaded the dishwasher. No one joined me. Tom settled into the recliner. Jenny poured wine. One of the boys turned up the TV. I stood at the sink, watching bubbles rise and burst over dishes I hadn't dirtied, in a kitchen I'd paid for, in a home I once owned alone. That notebook sat on the counter beside the fruit bowl, still untouched. Later that night, after the boys had gone to bed and Jenny had turned in, I sat at the little table in the alcove, my corner, as she called it. It fit a lamp, 2 chairs, and my sewing kit. I used to have an entire room for that. I opened the notebook. The first page stuck slightly from the factory glue. I smoothed it with my palm and picked up my pen. I didn't write a grocery list, or a memory, or a prayer. I wrote the date. Then, underneath, in small, neat print, 3 days from now, I'm giving notice. The pen didn't shake. My heart didn't race. If anything, it slowed, like it was settling into something long overdue. They thought they were being cute, giving me a notebook, a blank page, but they'd forgotten who taught them how to write in the first place. And now I was writing the final chapter of their stay. The morning after my birthday, the house was quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet, like the air after someone closes a door too hard. I boiled water for tea, the same Earl Grey I've drunk for 30 years, and found the mug with the chip near the handle. Jenny said it was time to throw it out. I liked it, because it fit my hand. I drank slowly, at the corner table, while the rest of the house woke in pieces. Footsteps above. A door slammed. The sound of the shower running, then stopping. I waited for the kettle to cool so I could refill it without the whistle. Tom came down first. Didn't look at me, just grunted and went straight for the fridge. He pulled out the orange juice, drank from the carton, then set it back and walked out. I wiped the handle after he left. I always did. Jenny followed 20 minutes later, dressed already, hair twisted up, lips tight with sleep. "Can you pick the boys up from school today?" she asked, not looking up from her phone. "I've got back-to-back calls." I nodded. She walked out without another word. I finished my tea, washed the mug, and dried it with the dish towel I kept hidden behind the pantry door. It had strawberries printed along the edge. Jenny once said it was too childish for her kitchen, so I used it only when no one else was around. That afternoon, I made lunch. I knew they wouldn't eat it, but I made it anyway. Lentil soup, the kind I used to cook when Jenny was small and her knees were always scabbed. I set a bowl aside for myself and ladled the rest into containers. No one thanked me. They never did. The boys came home loud. Backpacks dropped. Shoes kicked off. I asked them about their day. The older one muttered, "Fine." The younger didn't answer. He was already halfway up the stairs. I picked up their shoes, lined them neatly by the door. Jenny was on the couch by the time Tom came home. He kissed her on the cheek and said, "How's the old girl today?" Not to me, about me. I pretended not to hear. Dinner was frozen pizza. I offered to make salad. Jenny waved me off. "Don't fuss, Mum. It's already done." Tom laughed at something on his phone. The boys were yelling over a game on the TV. I ate my soup in the corner. Later, I found the notebook exactly where I'd left it. Still blue, still empty, but for the single line I'd written. 3 days from now, I'm giving notice. I turned the page. Tonight, I added, "She didn't say thank you for the soup. He called me the old girl." The boys don't know my name is Margaret, only Gran, like I'm part of the furniture. I didn't write in anger. I wrote in precision, like balancing a ledger. It wasn't the insult that hurt. It was the familiarity of it, the way they spoke around me, not to me, as if I had faded, not aged. Later, as the house settled into the hush of television and scrolling and soft snoring, I walked through the kitchen one more time, turned off the light, closed the cupboard door someone had left open, straightened the dish towel. Back in my room, a guest room really, no closet, just a dresser with 2 drawers. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened. Not for drama, just for confirmation. Nothing. No footsteps toward me. No one checking if I wanted a glass of water. No birthday card belated. No apology. Just the soft hum of a house that didn't miss me. I opened the drawer beside the bed. Inside, my husband's insurance papers, the original deed, and a copy of the last property tax receipt in my name. Filed. Updated. Waiting. The notebook lay on top of them all. I placed my hand on it and exhaled slowly. 2 more days. I woke before the sun, the way I used to when Jenny was a baby, and the house needed warming before her little feet touched the floor. Old habits rarely die. They just get quieter. I sat at the edge of the bed, my back stiff, and waited for the ache in my knees to ease before I stood. The kitchen was empty. I liked it best that way. I made oatmeal, plain, with a splash of milk, and ate it alone while the sky behind the blinds turned from steel to soft gold. The silence in the early morning wasn't the cold kind. It was mine. At 7:10, Tom's alarm buzzed upstairs. At 7:18, the boys thundered down the stairs like a herd. At 7:22, Jenny called out, "Mum, have you seen my green scarf?" I had. It was in the laundry basket, washed, folded, and placed neatly on her dresser the night before. She'd walked past it twice. She didn't say thank you. At 7:43, I buttoned the youngest boy's jacket. He let me, though he didn't meet my eyes. I kissed his head. He didn't pull away, but he didn't lean in either. Children can tell when love has turned into labor. At 8 Sue, the house was empty again. Their cars gone, their noise gone with it. I sat at the little table and looked out the window at the leafless tree that brushed against the glass. Winter had stripped it bare, but it was still standing. I turned back to the notebook. Page 3. They've stopped asking, stopped looking. I move through the house like a whisper no one hears. I closed it gently and reached for the brown envelope tucked behind the cereal boxes in the cupboard. Inside, the most important pieces of my life. The original mortgage document, dated 1987. The final payment receipt, stamped paid in full, in red ink, my husband's death certificate, my will, everything in my name. Still, Jenny never asked, Tom assumed. That night, over dinner, leftovers again, I watched them talk about a cruise they might take. "We'll need to cut back this month," Jenny said, twirling noodles around her fork. "Maybe skip the housekeeper." Tom nodded. "Maybe Mum can pitch in a bit more. You've got time, right?" I looked up. "I already do the laundry, the cooking, the shopping." Jenny laughed, light but edged. "We mean financially." Tom added, "You're living here rent-free after all." Rent-free, in the apartment I bought, in the space I held together after my husband died. I remembered sitting on the floor with Jenny when she was 12, eating ice cream from the tub after the power got cut. We lit candles and called it a party. Now I was a freeloader. I didn't argue. I didn't flinch. I just wiped my mouth with my napkin and cleared my plate. In the kitchen, I turned the faucet to hot, let the steam rise, and scrubbed harder than necessary. Later, alone in my room, I opened the notebook again. Page 4. Rent-free, they said, and I said nothing. But I won't forget. I didn't write threats. I didn't vent. I recorded. A ledger of small violences. A book of forgetting they hoped I'd do. That night, I slept with the envelope tucked beneath my pillow. Not for protection, for preparation. My room had one window, narrow and high, like a porthole. I used to call it the lighthouse, as a joke. Jenny didn't laugh. Said I was lucky to have my own space. I didn't tell her I missed the light. I just learned the shape of the shadows instead. There was a chair in the corner, once upholstered in pale yellow, now faded to the colour of dry bone. I sat in it each evening, not because it was comfortable, but because it faced the door. A habit from the years when I waited for my husband to come home late from shift. He never liked me worrying. I did anyway. Now I sat not waiting, but watching. The dresser had 2 drawers, one for clothes, one for proof. I had packed the second drawer long before I'd realized I might need it. Not because I expected betrayal, just because I had learned, slowly, that a mother's love doesn't always make a daughter kind. On the dresser sat a photo of Jenny at 5, missing her front teeth, grinning like the world would never be cruel. I looked at it sometimes, wondering when that version disappeared. The walls were bare. I wasn't allowed to hang anything. "We're trying to keep the aesthetic clean," Jenny had said. I kept my paintings, the ones I'd done in oils after retirement, in a box under the bed. I hadn't opened it in years. The closet, if you could call it that, was a metal rack with wheels. My sweaters hung in order, blue, grey, beige. The bright ones, the ones I wore when my husband was alive, had gone stiff with time. I folded them gently and tucked them behind the others. This was my corner, my assigned place, my room, but not mine. I wasn't allowed to cook after 8 p.m. "The noise," Jenny said. I wasn't to leave dishes in the sink. I wasn't to use their shampoo. I had my own soap, my own toothpaste, labelled, stored in a basket beneath the bathroom sink. One night, Tom left the front door open by accident. I closed it gently and turned the lock. The next morning, Jenny told me not to touch the door. "It throws off our security setting." I said nothing. The boys had outgrown me. I understood. That was natural. But they didn't sit beside me anymore. They didn't tell me about school. They didn't ask questions, even the silly ones they used to whisper at bedtime. Now they grunted or ignored. I wasn't angry at them. Children reflect what they see. I made them pancakes on Saturday. I set the table, poured syrup into the small white pitcher with the chipped handle. Jenny came in and frowned. "We're cutting back on sugar," she said, scooping their plates into the trash before they could finish. You know that. Tom didn't say a word, just sipped his coffee. That night, I sat in the yellow chair and wrote in the notebook again. My room has no hooks, no warmth. I live in the margins of a house I bought. And still, they think I'm lucky to be here. I didn't cry. I haven't in years. Not since my husband's hand went cold in mine. Not since the day Jenny said, "You'll be happier with us." But some nights, I'd trace the edge of the photo frame with one finger and remember what my voice used to sound like when I sang. I hadn't sung in this house. Not once. Tomorrow, I would go see Michael. He was our lawyer once. Old now, like me. But steady, still practiced out of that same office with the green door. I had already pulled the documents. The notebook went back in the drawer, my toothbrush back in the basket. The door, this time, I left unlocked. Not for them, for me. The next morning, Jenny asked me to clean the baseboards. "Just while we're out," she said, handing me a damp rag like a favor. "They're starting to look grimy, and Tom's parents might come by next week." I didn't ask why she couldn't do it herself. I didn't remind her that my hands, twisted with arthritis, made it hard to grip small things. I just nodded and tucked the rag into my apron pocket. After they left, Tom with his laptop bag, Jenny in her sunglasses, the boys dragging their feet, I stood in the living room, rag in hand, staring at the floorboards. I bent down slowly, knees clicking like old drawers, and began wiping. The scent of lemon cleaner filled my nose. My back ached within minutes, but I kept going. Not for them, for clarity. Every task now felt like a final tally. By noon, the kitchen was clean, dishes washed, dried, put away. I took out the trash, wiped the counters, swept the hallway. Jenny liked to say I enjoyed staying busy. She never asked why I avoided sitting still. In the afternoon, I sat in my room and opened the notebook again. Today, I cleaned her floor. Not because she asked, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to bend down and still get up on my own. Then I turned to the envelope. I pulled out the deed, unfolded it, ran my fingers over the notary seal. Still mine. Every square foot. I remembered the day we signed for this apartment. It was smaller than the house we sold, but it had light and warmth, and a balcony that caught the morning sun just right. My husband and I stood in the kitchen, still wrapped in our coats, and I said, "I think we could be happy here." He opened a bottle of cheap champagne and said, "We already are." He died in this apartment, quietly, in the spring. I had moved his recliner near the window so he could watch the birds. I held his hand for hours after the breathing stopped. We buried him in a blue suit. Jenny chose a grey one. I overruled her. After that, the apartment became mine alone. And then, slowly, it became not mine at all. Jenny moved in when she lost her job. Tom came later, with apologies and boxes. The boys shared the big room. I moved to the guest room. They said it was temporary. That was 7 years ago. Now they filled the space, decorated the walls, changed the curtains. My husband's books were boxed. My teacups stored in the garage. The photos of our wedding day, once hanging in the hallway, replaced with canvas prints from vacation spots I had never seen. I was allowed a chair, a drawer, and a narrow bed. But the title never changed. And now, finally, I remembered that. At 4 p.m., I dialed the number Michael had given me years ago. He answered on the second ring. "Margaret," he said, "I was wondering when you'd call. We agreed on a meeting, quiet, tomorrow." I didn't tell Jenny. I didn't mention it at dinner. I just served the stew I had simmered all day, watched them eat without gratitude, and smiled when Tom said, You should cook like this more often. Jenny frowned. But keep it low sodium, Mum. You know how salt affects your ankles. I nodded. But later, in my room, I opened the notebook again. Tomorrow, I stop asking. Tomorrow, I begin remembering out loud. The rag from the morning was still damp in the sink. I folded it once, then dropped it in the trash. Michael's office hadn't changed. Same olive green door, same chipped brass handle. The waiting room still had the faded blue armchairs and a stack of magazines from years gone by. I sat without touching anything. My hands rested on my purse, which held the envelope like a beating heart. He called me in with a warm smile. "Still sharp as ever, Margaret," he said, pulling out a chair for me. "You never did like small talk." I handed him the envelope. He opened it slowly, with the care of someone handling something sacred. He reviewed each paper, nodding, making soft sounds of affirmation. The original deed, the tax receipts, the notarized letter from 2003 stating sole ownership in my name after my husband's death. "Well," he said finally, "they're living in your home, with no formal lease, no rent payments, and no right to residency beyond your permission." I said nothing. He looked up at me. "Do you want to begin proceedings?" I nodded once. Discreetly. "Please?" Michael leaned back in his chair. "I can draft a notice of termination immediately. Since you're the legal owner, you have every right to rescind permission of occupancy with appropriate notice. 30 days is standard, but in this case— 3, I interrupted. 3 days. He studied me, then nodded. 3 days it is. We worked in silence. He printed the documents. I signed them, steady hand, clear mind. He notarized them on the spot. "You want me to arrange delivery?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'll handle that." When I left the office, the sun had slipped behind a bank of clouds. The air felt heavy with something that hadn't broken yet. Back home, I placed the documents in the same drawer where the notebook rested. I didn't open either. Instead, I made tea. In the kitchen, Jenny was arguing with one of the boys about a field trip. Tom was on the couch, phone glowing in his hand. Dinner was lasagna, the kind from the freezer section. I ate in silence. No one asked how my day had been. No one noticed the quiet smile that played at the edge of my lips. Later, I folded their laundry. Socks matched, shirts ironed. I placed Jenny's sweaters neatly on her bed. She never said thank you. I didn't expect her to. Before bed, I returned to my corner and opened the notebook. I saw Michael today. He remembered my name without hesitation. The papers are signed. 3 days. That night I slept with the windows open. The cold didn't bother me. It reminded me that I was alive. Morning broke with a light drizzle, the kind that clings to windows and makes the world feel softer than it really is. I brewed my tea, not rushing, and sat at the little table by the window. The steam curled up and disappeared, like smoke signals no one would ever read. Jenny came into the kitchen, hair still damp from her shower. "Can you watch the boys this weekend?" she asked without preamble. "Tom and I need a break." I sipped my tea. "No." She blinked, paused, then laughed a little. "What?" I said no. She stared for a second too long, then turned to the fridge. "Are you feeling okay?" I nodded. "Better than I have in years." She didn't press. Not yet. At noon, while they were out, I walked 2 blocks to the courier office. I handed over the thick manila envelope with the termination papers inside. "Signature required," I told the young man at the desk. He tapped his keyboard, printed a receipt, and said, "It'll arrive before 5. I nodded. On the way back, I stopped by the florist, bought a single white tulip. I didn't have a vase anymore, but a teacup would do. Back home, I trimmed the stem and placed it in the chipped cup on my table. It stood tall. By 4:47 p.m., the envelope had been delivered. I know because Jenny called out from the hallway, voice sharp. "Mum, what is this?" I didn't answer. She appeared in the doorway of my room, holding the envelope like it had bitten her. "This says we have 3 days to vacate." Tom followed, pale and silent, eyes scanning the paper. Jenny's voice rose. "Is this a joke?" I stood from my chair. "No. You can't be serious? You're evicting us?" "I'm asking you to leave." Tom finally spoke. "This is your apartment, legally?" "Yes." Jenny's face twisted. "We live here. The boys. I raised you here. I buried your father from this place. And I've lived like a guest ever since." Her voice cracked. "We're family. And family doesn't treat me like furniture." She opened her mouth, then closed it. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply handed her the original deed. Her hands trembled as she took it. "You're throwing us out," she whispered. "No," I said. "I'm reclaiming my home." She stared at me for a long time, then turned and walked out. Tom lingered for a moment, eyes full of something close to shame. Then he followed. That night, I ate dinner at my little table. The tulip still stood. The apartment, for the first time in years, felt still, not tense, not cold, just still. Later, I opened the notebook and wrote, "The courier came. They read the truth in print. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the paper. 3 days." I slept deeply that night. No dreams, just quiet. The morning after the notice arrived, the apartment smelled of panic. Doors opened and shut with more force than usual. Jenny's voice, usually clipped and in control, now carried a high edge, as if every word was pushing back against something invisible. Tom muttered on the phone, pacing the hallway. I didn't listen in. I didn't need to. I had lived in this house long enough to know the sound of desperation when it echoed off freshly painted walls. I made toast, buttered it slowly, sat with it while the tea steeped. No one joined me in the kitchen. At 9:17 a.m., Jenny knocked on my door. Not a gentle knock, a forced one, sharp, loud. I opened it. She was holding a folder. "Let's talk," she said. Her voice was flat, managerial, the way she used to talk to the boys' teachers when she was pretending not to be angry. I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't sit. She placed the folder on the little table and opened it with the flair of someone who'd been planning an argument all night. "Okay," she began. "Legally, yes. You own the apartment. But let's not pretend you've been doing this alone. We've contributed. You've lived here without paying rent." She bristled. "We've covered groceries, utilities." I nodded. "Groceries I cook. Utilities I don't use past 8:01 p.m. Her jaw clenched. She flipped a paper. "If we go to court, it'll look bad. You'll come off like an old woman who asked her family to leave." She looked up. "Yes." I smiled faintly. "Then let it look bad." Her voice cracked then. Just slightly. "Mom, where are we supposed to go?" "I don't know." "And the boys?" "They deserve a home where their mother doesn't treat the owner like help." Silence. She gathered her papers slowly, as if weight alone could stall the truth. As she reached the door, I said, "You had 7 years to build something of your own. I gave you more than most would." Her shoulders stiffened. "We didn't ask you to." "No," I said. "That was the problem." She didn't slam the door. That would have been too loud for someone still trying to pretend she had dignity. Instead, she closed it with care. But I heard her crying down the hall. Later, Tom came by. He didn't argue. He didn't defend. He just stood in the doorway, rubbing the back of his neck. "She's scared." he said quietly. I was too, I said, but I stayed quiet for too long. He nodded, eyes to the floor. We'll figure it out. I said nothing. When he left, I sat again by the window. The tulip had begun to droop, but only slightly. The teacup caught its shadow. I opened the notebook. She brought folders. He brought silence. Neither brought apology, but I brought truth, and I'll bring it again tomorrow, if I have to. Outside, the drizzle returned. Gentle, relentless. I let the kettle sing longer than usual, let it fill the room with steam. The apartment, for the first time in years, felt mine. Not because they were leaving, because I had stayed. On the morning of the third day, the apartment was thick with unspoken words. Suitcases stood half-packed in the hallway. The boys moved quietly, glancing between their parents and the floor. No one raised their voice. The silence had shifted, no longer filled with tension, but with consequence. Jenny didn't speak to me, not even in passing. She had taken to walking with her phone glued to her ear, muttering to realtors, to storage companies, to friends who offered sympathy, but no space. Tom did the heavy lifting, literally. He moved boxes out to the car, then back in again when plans fell through. He didn't make eye contact. I brewed tea, cleaned the bathroom, changed my bed sheets. At 11:32 a.m., the doorbell rang. Jenny opened it. I heard the courier's voice, polite and distant, as he asked for a signature. The thump of a heavy envelope hitting her palm. Then the door closed. A moment later, she stormed into the kitchen, paper shaking in her hand. "You're giving us 7 hours?" she shouted. 7? I turned from the sink. "You received the notice 3 days ago. You didn't even check if we had anywhere to go." "I'm not required to." Tom appeared behind her, his eyes red-rimmed. "Margaret, please." I turned fully now. "Tom, I gave you 3 years of free housing. I cooked your meals. I washed your clothes. I raised your children when you were busy." Jenny's voice cracked. "So this is revenge?" "No, this is reclamation." She laughed, sharp, humorless. "You'll be alone." "I've been alone since the day I gave you a key." That silenced her. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. I returned to the sink, rinsed the last plate, dried my hands. They left the room. By 3 p.m., the front door opened and closed more often than it had in years. Boxes were shuffled into the hallway. A suitcase bumped against the stairs. One of the boys started crying, then stopped himself. I sat in my chair, hands folded. At 4:56 p.m., they were gone. No goodbye. No slammed door. Just absence. I walked through the apartment. The living room was bare except for the couch. The boys' room had only a mattress left on the floor. The kitchen felt bigger without the clutter of Jenny's supplements and Tom's meal prep containers. In my room, I opened the notebook. They're gone. No speech. No final plea. Only the sound of boxes, of breathing, of departure. I am not triumphant. I am still. I closed it gently, placed it back in the drawer. Then I went to the balcony. The rain had stopped. The air was cool, clean. I stood there for a long time, letting the silence press against my skin. Not the silence of erasure, but the kind that follows clarity. No music played, no voices rose, just the hum of a building returning to itself. I made dinner, just for one, and I ate every bite. The apartment echoed in strange ways without them. There was a quiet now, not the cautious silence I had grown used to, the kind that follows judgment, but a hollow space that took time to fill. I walked from room to room that first evening, not to inspect, but to remember. Every corner bore traces of erasure, picture hooks without frames, outlines on the wall where Jenny's prints had hung, a faint ring where Tom's coffee mug had always sat on the table I'd once bought from a thrift shop with my husband. I picked up each trace, not with anger, but with a kind of reverent curiosity, as if I were dusting off memories buried under someone else's weight. The boys' room was empty, except for a sock left behind in the corner. I picked it up, folded it, and placed it in the drawer I used to keep spare linens in. Not because I hoped they'd return, but because I still remembered how to care, even after being discarded. I changed the curtains in the living room, brought out the pale green ones I had tucked away years ago, the ones Jenny said were too floral. I hung them slowly, gently smoothing the creases with my hands. Then I unpacked my paintings. 4 canvases, landscapes mostly. One of a lake at dusk, one of a garden path. I placed them where I wanted, no permission asked. In the kitchen, I rearranged the cabinets, moved the mugs to the lower shelf, replaced Jenny's glass jars with the old ceramic containers I had stored away. I pulled out the teacup with the blue rim, my husband's favourite, and placed it next to the kettle. By dusk, the apartment no longer felt like a stage set for someone else's life. It felt like mine. I sat on the couch with my tea, facing the window. Outside, the lights of the city flickered to life. The hum of evening traffic rose faintly in the distance. And then, the doorbell rang. I didn't move at first, let it ring once more. When I opened the door, Tom stood there. No suitcase, no folder, just him. I just wanted to say, he began, then stopped. He looked older in the dim hallway light, not by years, by weight. I waited. I didn't stop her, he said. I should have, but I didn't. I let her talk to you like that. I let it happen. He rubbed his palms together. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. I studied him. For a moment, I saw the young man he used to be, the one who brought me flowers the first time he visited, the one who once asked me how I liked my tea. You said nothing when it mattered, I said. He nodded. That's not the same as doing nothing. He didn't reply, just looked down, then back up. If the boys ever want to visit, I'll decide then. He nodded again. Fair. Then he turned and left. I closed the door, locked it, turned off the porch light. Back in my room, I opened the notebook. Tom came. He looked for a door that had already closed. He didn't ask for mercy, only memory. But memory has a lock. I slept with the windows open again, and this time I dreamed of music. The apartment felt bigger without their voices, but not empty. Space, I learned, is not loneliness. It's air returning to where it belongs. I moved through each room slowly, barefoot, letting the floor remember my steps. The first thing I did was reclaim the dining table. I pulled off Jenny's beige runner, folded it neatly, and placed it in the donation box. Then I spread the old patchwork cloth I had sewn with my husband decades ago. It had a coffee stain in one corner and a missing button sewn where a tear had been. But it was ours. It felt like coming home. I rearranged the bookshelf next. My books had been boxed, pushed behind Jenny's parenting manuals and Tom's tax guides. I unpacked them. Slim novels with worn spines, gardening journals, a cookbook with my husband's scribbles in the margins. I lined them up with care. No order, just instinct. That afternoon, I opened the windows and let the breeze roll in. I turned on the small radio I kept hidden in a drawer, another thing Jenny had once called clutter, and let it play softly, like background breath. I moved the recliner back to its old spot near the window, the one where my husband used to sit. I dusted it off, fluffed the cushion, and placed the photo of us, young, laughing, wind in our hair, on the table beside it. Then I made soup, real soup, not something from a can or a tray, leek and potato, just like he liked. I ate slowly, letting the steam curl around my fingers as I held the bowl. No one interrupted. No one reminded me of salt or calories or portion sizes. Just me, my meal, my peace. That night, I found the old jewelry box Jenny had once called too old-fashioned. Inside were pieces I hadn't worn in years. A tiny gold pin shaped like a tulip, my mother's locket, the bracelet my husband gave me the year we almost lost the house but didn't. I slipped the bracelet on. My wrist had grown thinner, but it still fit. I sat in the yellow chair, opened the notebook, and wrote, "The apartment breathes with me again. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't sigh at my footsteps. It just exists. And so do I." For the first time in months, I sang. Not loud, not for anyone else. Just for the walls that once held my laughter, my sorrow, and now, my return. The rooms didn't answer. They didn't need to. They were listening. The days that followed were quiet in a way that didn't ache. I learned the sound of the apartment again. The real sound. The creak of the kitchen tile near the sink. The gentle tick of the hallway clock. The whisper of wind curling through a window that never quite shut tight. I started waking without alarm, not because someone needed me, but because I wanted to see the sun come in. Each morning, I made my bed with deliberate hands, smoothing the quilt I'd sewn in the winter after my husband died. Jenny had packed it away, said it made the room look too busy. Now it lay over my sheets like a memory I chose to keep close. I found the old watering can in the hall closet. It still had a sticker on the bottom from the hardware store we used to visit every spring. I filled it and walked to the balcony, bare and cracked from years of neglect. I pulled out the weeds, scrubbed the railings, and planted mint in a clay pot. Then basil. Then rosemary. Something to care for that asked nothing in return. I stopped folding towels I didn't use. I stopped scrubbing floors for people who never noticed. I stopped saying it's fine when it wasn't. One afternoon, I took out the dusty typewriter from the top shelf of the hallway cabinet. It still worked. I typed a letter, not to anyone in particular. Just words I hadn't said aloud. I was not a burden. I was the floor you stood on and forgot to thank. I didn't sign it. I didn't have to. That evening, I pulled the second dining chair to the balcony and sat with my tea. The city stretched below me, flickering like it was winking at someone. The mint plant was already leaning toward the light. From somewhere below, a radio played faint jazz. I closed my eyes and let the music reach me. When I came back inside, I opened the notebook. I used to be a shadow in my own home. Now I open the windows. I take up space. I breathe without permission. I placed the notebook on the shelf. Not hidden, not buried. Right between the cookbooks and the poetry. Let anyone who entered see it. Let them ask. Or not. I didn't need them to understand. I only needed to keep the window open, the water warm, and the herbs reaching. That was enough. The first time I turned on music loud enough to fill the apartment, I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the dial, old instincts whispering, "Someone will say something." But no one did. No voice from the hallway reminding me of bedtime routines. No passive sigh about noise levels. Just a song, swelling and unapologetic, spilling into the corners of a place that no longer asked me to be quiet. I played it while I dusted the shelves, while I polished the mirror in the entryway, while I repainted the small bench by the door. Yellow, bright, defiant. Jenny would have hated it. I even hummed along. The apartment changed under my hands. Not dramatically, but precisely. I didn't buy anything new. I didn't need to. I just returned what had been hidden, packed away, pushed aside. The floral dish towels, the porcelain sugar bowl, the glass jar that once held my sewing needles now sat proudly on the kitchen counter, filled with peppermints. I moved slowly through each room, not with urgency, but with intent. I didn't want to rush the reclaiming. Every drawer reopened was a small act of resistance. Every corner cleaned was a quiet correction to the years I'd spent disappearing. And then I reached the closet. Jenny had kept it locked for months, claiming it was overflow storage. I never asked questions. I'd learned not to, but now I had the keys again. All of them. I opened it slowly, expecting old holiday decorations, maybe unused kitchen tools. Instead, I found boxes. Mine. Labelled in faded ink. Mom's stuff. Inside, the shawl I wore the day my first grandson was born. A stack of letters from my husband, written when he travelled for work. My teaching certificates from before Jenny was born. A framed cross-stitch I'd made in 1972 that once hung above our bed. All of it hidden, stacked like old newspapers. Forgotten, until I opened the door. I sat on the floor and went through each box. Carefully, slowly. Not mourning, not raging, just remembering. By evening, I had cleared the hallway wall and hung the cross-stitch in the centre. "Home is where they remember your name," it read. That night, I lit a candle on the table and served myself dinner on the china Jenny once said was too fragile for daily use. It held up just fine. Afterward, I turned down the lights, pulled the shawl over my shoulders, and stood in the middle of the living room. I looked around, not to see what was left, but to acknowledge what had returned. Me. I opened the notebook and wrote, "They locked my memories in a closet, not out of cruelty, out of convenience. But I am not storage. I am story. And I will hang myself back on these walls with nails that will not bend." Then I tucked the notebook away and placed my wedding photo beside it. And I slept with the lamp on. Just because I wanted to. The days came softer now. Not because life had become easier, but because I had stopped bracing for sharpness. When I opened the windows in the morning, I no longer listened for footsteps in the hall, or waited for someone to ask where I was going, or why the kettle was on again. I simply lived. That week, I bought a new pillow, not expensive, just firm enough to support the part of me that had gone too long without softness. I bought it in cash, carried it home in a cloth bag I sewed myself years ago. The clerk smiled when she handed me the receipt. "Treating yourself?" she asked. I almost said no. Then I said, "Yes." I stopped at the bakery on the corner, bought a single apple tart, ate it on a park bench without guilt, without hurrying. The sky was overcast, but it didn't feel grey. It felt honest. When I came home, the apartment smelled faintly of rosemary. The plant on the balcony had bloomed in a quiet, defiant way. No one had told it to grow. It simply had. I stood by the open balcony door with my tea in hand, letting the breeze move through me like something familiar but forgotten. I thought of how long I had lived, as if my presence needed to be justified. Through chores, through silence, through diminishing myself into roles. Cook, babysitter, invisible witness. Not anymore. That evening, I pulled the old writing desk out of the bedroom corner, cleaned the top, sharpened a few pencils, laid out my papers. I didn't write anything grand, just a list. Things I'd stopped asking permission for, lighting candles, playing music during dinner, taking up space at the dining table, laughing when no one else was home. Things I planned to reclaim next, painting on Sundays, sending postcards just because, hosting tea without needing a reason. My name. For years, I was just Gran, Mum. Her. But I had a name. Margaret Ann Pierce. I practiced writing it again, like a signature I hadn't seen in ages. That night, I walked barefoot through the apartment before bed, turning off lights one by one. In the hallway, I paused beside the photo I'd hung. A picture of me and my husband standing on the boardwalk, both of us laughing. I whispered to it, "It's ours again." Then I returned to the balcony. The city blinked in slow pulses, horns in the distance. Someone playing a trumpet 3 floors down. And above all that, quiet. I didn't want the past back. I wanted this small, unshouted ownership of life. I sat with my shawl, my tea, my breath. And then, softly, I opened the notebook again. They erased me from the rooms I paid for, but the air still knows my name. The tea still cools beside my hand. The rosemary still bends toward the sun. This apartment does not apologize, and neither do I. I let the pen fall gently on the page, and I slept with the balcony door open. Not because I needed escape, but because I had nothing to run from anymore. It was a Sunday morning when the knock came. Not frantic, not desperate, just firm, like someone who had rehearsed the sound of asking. I was folding laundry, my own for once. The towels were warm, fresh from the dryer. The light spilled across the floor, and the mint leaves on the balcony quivered in the breeze. I didn't rush to the door. I finished folding the last towel, placed it gently on the stack, and smoothed the edge. Then I opened it. Jenny stood there. Her lipstick was faint, no sunglasses, no folder in hand, just her, clutching a canvas tote with something inside that rattled softly when she shifted her weight. She didn't speak right away. I leaned against the doorframe. "Hi," she said. I nodded. She looked thinner, tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from long days, but the kind that settles in when you finally realize you're no longer the center of someone else's world. "I'm not here to beg," she said quickly, eyes dropping. I brought you something." She reached into the tote and pulled out the notebook, the same pale blue one from my birthday, the one she gave me like a joke. Only now it wasn't empty. She handed it to me. I didn't take it. "I started reading what you left," she said, her voice low. "It wasn't meant for me, I know, but it made me remember things I forgot, or tried to." She looked up. "I don't expect to stay. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to return it. I didn't know what it meant when I gave it to you. I thought it was harmless. I didn't realize it would become—" She didn't finish. I finally reached out and took the notebook. It was heavier now. Not from weight, but from use. From truth. "I thought you were just being quiet," she said, voice trembling. "I didn't know you were remembering." I nodded once. She stepped back. "Okay," she whispered. "That's all." She turned to leave, but then she stopped, turned slightly over her shoulder and said, "You named me once. You gave me everything I needed to become who I am. And then I erased you. I see that now. I don't want anything from you. I just wanted you to see that I finally see you." I didn't answer. She walked away. The door closed softly behind her. I carried the notebook to the table, set it down beside my tea, and ran my hand over its cover. It didn't need to be written in anymore. It had done its work. I looked around the apartment. The walls were mine again. The plants leaned toward the light. My shawl rested over the back of the chair. The smell of cinnamon lingered from the toast I'd made earlier. I had not rebuilt a mansion. I had not made a statement to the world. I had done something harder. I had remembered myself out loud. If you're reading this and you know what it's like to be overlooked in your own home, if you've ever stood in a room full of people you loved and felt like a ghost, then maybe you understand. Maybe you've got a drawer of documents, or a mind full of stories, or a silence you've carried for too long, thinking it was the same as peace. It's not. Let me be the voice you haven't used yet. Let me say this clearly, so you don't have to whisper it in the dark. You are not a guest in the life you built. You are not a burden just because they stopped thanking you. You are not furniture. You are the foundation, and you have the right to stand, to speak, and to remember, fully, freely, fiercely. If this story touched a part of you that's been quiet too long, stay with us. Subscribe to Grandma's Untold Stories. Here, we don't raise our voices, we raise the truth, and that's louder than anything.